A conversation with Bobbie Chen, a product manager at Stytch, who is building the infrastructure for agents to prove who they are. We live in a world where millions of agents knock on every digital door simultaneously. Some are legitimate, such as your coding assistant, your research agent, your automation tools. Others are predators, farming free credits and stealing compute impersonating users at scale. Bobbie's built is agent, a protocol for identifying and authenticating these digital entities. But here is the paradox. The same AI that makes fraud detection possible also makes fraud easier. Attackers use ChatGPT to probe your site once, then write deterministic scripts to exploit what they found. It's ROI-driven warfare. Economics are brutal. AI startups hemorrhage money through free trials. Bad actors can spin up hundreds of thousands of accounts, claim $5 each, and suddenly $500,000 in compute is gone, vanished into the dark web. The old defenses, CAPTCHAs, email verification, a theater. You can buy 50 Gmail accounts for $1. AI solves CAPTCHAs better than humans. Bobbie is building the new defenses, device fingerprinting that catches automation, shadow banning that lets attackers think that they won while neutralizing their attack, the cryptographic signatures that will enable agent-to-agent trust. This is Bobbie Chen. Hi, everybody, and welcome to another episode of What About AI Agents? Today, we are joined by Bobbie Chen, a product manager for fraud and security at Stytch. He's on the forefront of solving some of these critical security challenges for AI and for Agentic. So really bringing that unique vantage point about how do we identify agents, how do we identify good and bad agents, how do we secure them, and in a world where all this is scaling up exponentially, this is a really, really important topic. Bobbie's team recently launched something called his agent, which is like a protocol, helping people understand, is my site being accessed by an agent or not? And, some of the interesting things that Bobbie writes about is agentic experience, which I also find to be something I'm extremely interested in. So Bobbie, I'll let you introduce yourself and then we are going to get started.
Yeah, thanks for having me. Yeah, and so I think that's a great intro. I'm a product manager. We recently shipped Is Agent, which is an agent identification SDK to help website owners understand and perhaps respond to those agents that are on their site. And so you mentioned agent experience. Agent experience is a term coined by one of the co-founders of Netlify, which is pretty parallel to developer experience before that or user experience. It's kind of the idea that, well, when we talk about developer experience, it's different a little bit from sort of the layman user experience because people who are a little more technical have different needs and wants from the sites that they visit. And we think in the same way that AI agents are not exactly like humans. They have different needs or modalities that they prefer, and we should be trying to cater to them. One of the, I think, most common things that we see today is like on a documentation page, the ability to copy as markdown is something that I consider to be an agent experience feature because AI agents do better with sort of the denser content of markdown instead of trying to parse a whole bunch of HTML.
Yeah, I think being able to communicate to agents effectively is super important. I had another guest recently. We were talking about how having all those tailwind classes on your website doesn't really help. It's cool gradients, but agents are not going to be happy parsing those tailwind classes to get info from your site. So having like a simple text to markdown version is really something that we need to be providing to agents at a very, very easy way. So what are some other things about agentic experience that you have noticed at Stytch, some of the best practices that you've identified, maybe like top 3 or 5 best practices for agentic experience?
Yeah, I think something about agentic experience is that one of the nice things about it is that it's a little bit easier for people to test against. In the sense that if you want to do user experience testing with, say, somebody who's totally new to your product, first you need to find someone who's totally new to your product. You need to convince them to come in and run through all of these tests basically to see if things are working. Whereas if you are, and I think this is common among, for us and our customers, let's say you're a tech company that is trying to cater towards other tech companies. It's significantly easier for you to take a coding AI agent, point it at your documentation and try and run through and see if you're getting results that are reasonable or correct. And if they're not, that's pretty low-hanging fruit for you to go figure out, oh, what should I fix? How should I improve? And you can get into a very quick iteration cycle about making changes, testing them against someone who is totally new in the sense that there's no context from your previous conversation, and try again.
Hmm.
So that's kind of like a high level, I guess it's really an evaluations kind of approach there. And that's at the process level. I think concretely, there are things that are, again, talking about documentation. We talked about copy to markdown. There's LLMs.txt, which is another format for documentation that says maybe instead of even trying to visit every page and then reconstruct those pages together, maybe we should just slam all the text into a single page or all the text that's relevant to our particular topic. So those things are pretty light, I would say. I think one of the more interesting ideas that we've talked about in agent experience is the ability to identify when an AI agent is trying to do something that is not the best way to do it. And in those situations, you can actually catch that, throw up basically a just-in-time UI element that says, it's almost like Clippy. It looks like you're trying to do this thing. There's a way better way to do this thing. And coming back to like security and authentication, I think one of those places is like actually login. So like to do anything that's not trivial, you pretty much want to be associated with some concept of a user or an account that has access to things that other people don't. And so today, the state of the art is or it's not the state of the art. Today, the thing that people think of first is, I'll just give my agent my username and my password. It'll go log in and become me. And when it does that, then it can do anything that I can. And that's great. It's really convenient for testing and making sure your proof of concept works. But when you take it to production, you really don't want to have a fully powered agent that has access and can do things like delete your entire account or send out emails with uncontrolled content to all of your users. So I think there's a lot of risk there. And so coming back to sort of what is the purpose of the agent experience, it's to catch scenarios where someone is about to do something really dangerous with their agent. And you say, actually, we have an agent authentication method for you. It's built on top of the approach that we're taking is building on top of the OAuth standard. So today already you can do things like, I'd like to give Slack access to some of my Google Drive documents, but not all of them. And so that same OAuth protocol is already integrated into MCP. And it's also a way that you can give scoped access to your own accounts to AI agents.
That's extremely powerful because, giving it access in test environment is one thing, but giving access to it as you in production, because first of all, you can't fingerprint who did what. And like when you deal with compliance, you need to have audit logging and things like that. And you need to know that agent did that and not employee X did that. So when employee X gives a full admin access to agent and agent deletes production, the employee X is responsible. But when agent does it, the employee that built the agent is responsible. At least you know what happened, right? And it makes investigation easy. So you deal with agent authentication, right? Scoped authentication for agents for different systems. How do you identify agents, and how does the authentication work? How do you fingerprint good agents, bad agents? How do you give access? How does it work? Just if you can explain it a bit to the listeners.
Yeah, I'll say there's a couple of different approaches, basically. And I'll start with the good agents. The good agents are easier to identify because there's some reason that you should trust them. And so there's like a variety of ways that you can do this. I'll talk about OAuth first, and I'll talk about some of the other approaches. So in OAuth, you go through sort of this consent managed flow where you get a screen like, I would like to have access to these particular scopes. Do you approve? And when you approve, this kicks off a process. Ultimately, the agent gets back a token. And then you use this token for authentication, just like you would use a token for any other kind of authentication. And so there's that. I think that's the best and most practical way to do it with permissions in the way that you want. Sometimes people take this into the concept of like non-human identities or service accounts, where you pretty much just do have an API key rather than getting a subset of your permissions. It's just like a totally separate user concept. And that's something that works pretty well as well. And then finally, I'm working on an emerging open standard called WebBotAuth. And in WebBotAuth, this is kind of a more decentralized way of doing this authentication, where ultimately the agent is using cryptographic signing of their messages so that on the other side, the server, you can look up their public key and verify it. And that's something that's really valuable because today you might be familiar with the user agent header in a browser. And the user agent is just a string, which means that I can go and change my user agent and say, actually, I'm not running Chrome, I'm running Safari. Or actually, I'm not a bot, I'm actually a human who's trying to do other things. And so because that is unsigned, it's sort of untrusted. Whereas with the signatures, you can at least tie these back to a specific cryptographic key. And that's all on the good bot side of the house.
So they cannot spoof. But people try to spoof the agents, and they try to pretend to be real users, and they try to like go and like send 1,000 agents on your site to do whatever. So what are some of the security measures that can be put in place to identify Agentic right now on your web app? And because there are, like as we mentioned, there are good agents. We trust them and we want them to do good things for us. Those are run by our employees or by our customers. But what if like our competitor or a bad actor tries to weaponize Agentic against like my company, for example? What tools do I have at my disposal to defend myself and to protect my product?
Yeah, exactly. That kind of takes us to the other side of the house on protecting yourself from bad bots. And so at Stytch, I work on a product called device fingerprinting. This is an approach that takes certain signals from your browser in order to try to identify characteristics like those that are using bots. And so overwhelmingly, automated traffic on the web for the use cases that you described, that are things like spam or malicious crawling or things that you'd probably want to rate limit or prevent entirely, almost completely these are based on headless browser automation. And so they're actually using the same kinds of testing tools that you might use. So that's things like Puppeteer or Selenium that drive an automated web browser, might not even show the content on the screen. And so there's a lot of different ways that you can detect these browsers. All I'll say is that the good testing automation software will just tell you like, hey, I'm a testing software. But there's also a lot of tools that try to hide that away. And so what we do is we actually have quite a broad user base. So our customers include the people like Calendly and Replit. So we have a pretty good view of what good browsers look like, of what browsers that sort of in the default configuration or in the original configuration look like. And then we can see what people try to do to manipulate them. And so maybe a dangerous thing to say, but out there are a ton of what people call fingerprint switching browsers. They're things that try to hide those attributes. We actually do quite a lot of active research as well to look at those browsers, make sure that we can continue to detect what they're doing. Ultimately, a lot of the time is that there's maybe 5 different ways to get the same information. And a lot of the time when you try to change those attributes as someone hiding their identity, you might change 3 or 4 of them, but forget the 5th. And now you have this mismatch where, let's say you have, just to make something up, you say that you have the bunch of plugins installed, and actually we know that legitimate browsers should always have a certain number of plugins at a minimum. Yeah.
So now to kind of paint the picture of when this gets bad or why this is a problem, do you have any war stories that you can share with us, basically, of something that happened and that where this can actually prevent or save businesses money or some sort of reputational damage when this happens at scale, when this type of attacks do happen? What do agentic attacks look like these days, anyways?
Yeah. So I'll say that, well, 2 parts. So I'll talk about sort of the business problem, and then I'll talk about the technical things that we saw underneath that. And so I think this is a problem that's common to a lot of AI startups today, in that running AI services is actually pretty expensive. It's not like traditional software. You actually need to like pay money to run these, even if you're hosting them yourself. And so one of the challenges is getting users to even try your product. So a lot of companies will run free trials, or they'll give away free credits of some kind. And when you do that, as soon as you do that, the incentive is for bad actors to go and create 100,000 free accounts to claim $5 of free credit. And now they have $500,000 of value that they can go either resell for a cheaper price, or use it themselves to, like, say it's a coding agent, to write more coding scripts, or say it's like video generation to write, phishing videos to try and make money in a different way. So that's like the business problem. We see this really on the rise. And so I think every company who runs a free trial program is at risk here, basically. And free trials, I think I would say, are kind of considered a marketing expense, right? So you don't expect that every free trial is going to convert to a paid customer. But at the same time, you really want these numbers to represent, hey, I did 100 free trial signups yesterday. How many of those are actually real people that are going to convert? And how many of those are instantly getting resold on some dark website? So that's something that where device fingerprinting helps you identify that. Let's say they're creating a bunch of different accounts. I'll say that it's really easy to get a huge number of accounts, even at legitimate email providers like Gmail. You can buy like 50 Gmail accounts for under $1. And so those kinds of controls are not super effective. We know that CAPTCHAs are not super effective either. And so when you automate these at scale, it's hard to do that in a way that changes your device characteristics enough that you can't be correlated together. And so that's where device fingerprinting is important.
Right. So we detect that the person is an agent and that somebody is trying to do. How do we circumvent that attack? So let's say, because I remember like at one point, like at early days of my company, so some people figured out that you could send emails like invite users and send a nice invitation. So they used that to basically send spam to 100,000 people, which was not nice because they
Yeah.
figured out how to abuse that. So how do you, like, once this is detected, what tools do you offer, or what does can a person do to defend themselves? Obviously you can cut access, but then you're stopping legitimate users from signing up for the free trial. How do you defend yourself and block this?
Yeah. I'll say that, yeah, that's a really common problem as well. And I think these email spammers are really creative. They're like, hi, first name. And it's like, actually, my first name is get your free Bitcoin here. Here's a very sketchy link. And this gets emailed to 1,000 people. Huge problem. Yeah. So I think there's different controls you can do. And so one of them is sort of stopping them at the front door, which is to say you try to sign up, you match the signature of a known bad actor, and we just stop you from signing up. That's sort of the most basic thing you can do. And it is effective at times. If you're getting more attention, it can also help the attacker figure out what you're doing exactly. So they'll tweak their settings until they can get by, and now they've gotten in. So I think a really interesting tactic here is to do either additional verification on those accounts or to do a form of shadow banning. So additional verification is something like, you signed up, we think you're suspicious, but we're not 100% sure. How about you give us a credit card number? We're not going to charge it, but we're going to see if the credit card works, and we're going to see if you've used it on a previous account before. And that cuts out a huge amount of spam because it's a lot harder to get real credit cards than it is to get a real email account. So that's one. Shadow banning is another, in that if you're really sure that someone is a bad actor, let's say you know this because it's coming from the same IP and you've only ever saw bad traffic from that IP, and actually they forgot to clear their cookies once, so you know it's actually them. Then you can do something called shadow banning, in which you let them take actions on their site as if they were working, but you do something else. And so in the coding world, maybe you're giving them some really cheap model which doesn't actually work very well. Or say sometimes there are these companies that do like free contests or free giveaways where it's like enter for a chance to win. And you can say, thanks, we received your entry. And on the back end, you know, you filtered it out actually because it's a bad actor. And doing these kinds of things, it changes the feedback loop that an attacker has so that we make it harder for them. And that's a tactic actually that comes from like the gaming world. It's very common for like big like AAA multiplayer games to do ban waves where they know some people are cheating in the game, but they're not going to do anything until suddenly one day they're going to ban 1 million accounts because they've all been using the same cheating tools.
Yeah, the ban hammer.
Yeah.
Right. So moving back to the topic of agentic authentication, what are the advantages of implementing is agent on my sort of product and service? What advantages does it give me? How do I go into the technical details? How do I get this implemented? What is it going to cost me? Like, well, what like, because I would like to have something like that on my tools, and I would like to have all those capabilities on my tools, and I can vibe code them, or I can use something that's already there and not spend time talking to Cloud Code.
Yeah, definitely. So the way that you integrate, we really try to keep this lightweight. So it's like a JavaScript snippet. So it does require signing up. So you sign up for a Stytch account, you take our API key and you a JavaScript snippet and you put it into your website. There's a single API call that's called isAgent. And then there's a couple of like React components if you want to say display some content if you detect that an agent is detected. So that's it. I think you can integrate in like under an hour. It really is pretty quick, and then you'll be able to receive the response, which is a JavaScript object that's like, is agent true? Identity is, say, it's ChatGPT agent, or it's something like that. And
And
from
what
there,
does that cost?
the first 10,000 month are free. Beyond that, we go to our device fingerprinting product is priced at half a cent per lookup
Mm.
over time. So depending on the scale, though, there can be significant discounting. So that's where we are.
Oh, nice, nice. Sorry, I like to ask about the cost because I always think it's good to come up front and say, look, this is what you can get for free, this is what you're gonna pay for. But ultimately, when we fingerprint these agents, we are trying to circumvent things that can potentially cost us a lot more than half a cent per lookup, right?
Exactly.
Especially when we're running those large models at scale and we're offering large context windows and people find that out and they decide, well, I'm just going to farm you out for your credits. And then you burn through. The OpenAI sends you a very big bill. And
Yeah, exactly. I'm curious, are you using coding agents or any tools like that right now?
well, in our company, we use coding agents. So most of our team these days is basically vibe coding. Well, they know how to code, but they are mostly supervising agents. And in Doxy, we are just introducing a bunch of these documentation copilot tools to like our enterprise clients, and we work with them to systematize knowledge and bring that type of tooling. So to me, it's important because I do offer a free trial, and there will be possibilities to abuse it once we like release our new kind of capabilities. So I thought having agentic authentication and knowing what the agents are and how agents interact with your system, and because there are good and there are bad agents, as you mentioned. So, and you specifically focus on fraud detections. This is your kind of this is your line of work. So, where do you see this agentic progress? In one of our previous podcasts, we had a discussion about agent to agent communication, which increasingly is becoming something that's gonna, I guess, create AGI for us over time, where agents communicate with agents and build trust factors in agents. So agents being able to fingerprint agents, and like, let's say an insurance agent verifies for the shipping agent that this is in place. And so how does that integrate into the bigger world of agent to agent?
Yeah, I would say that at the level when we're doing agent to agent, I think you're going to see a lot of pressure basically to move to like the cryptographic signing based authentication that we talked about before. And maybe that's tied to something like a well-known domain. I do think something like that might trend towards what we see in the email world, where it's technically possible for anyone to send an email, a lot of things that you might want to do to make sure you don't get caught in spam filters. And once you do, you want to preserve your reputation, make sure your keys are only being used to do good things,
Mm.
so that you don't. So that you maintain your trust among other agents. I think that's sort of the key there. I do think um, there's always going to be the uh, need for the ability to do certain things that are more private or more anonymous. And so it's important for us to remember that and be able to keep things optional. But I
Mm.
do think like the majority of say business traffic is going to be fully authenticated because say I'm a SaaS company selling to you. I have nothing to hide here.
So how do you deal with things like GDPR? Because Europeans are like super aggressive against fingerprints and being anonymous. And how does that get reconciled with like huge amounts of agentic traffic they're going to start getting? And the people are like, you're not going to be able to identify things as easily because of things like GDPR. How would that work on that side of?
Yeah. And so privacy and compliance are pretty important to us as well. I'll say that a lot of GDPR has to do with controlling personal information specifically. And
Mm.
so I think there is like an interesting legal question that's like, to what extent is an AI agent an extension of me as a person? Are the characteristics of the agent protected in the same way that my characteristics are? And I think today the answer is not really. Like the tools that you use, say, it's not really personal information to know that somebody owns a car and that car has four wheels, because that's not a characteristic that is specifically tied to that person. Whereas on the agent side, if you say that this person uses an agent with certain characteristics, depending on how unique you get, that could become more interesting. And the other side of that is, like in the GDPR specifically, the right to be forgotten or the right to be deleted, in which a user can request that you delete all personal information associated with them. And that means that you need to be able to go back into your systems and find those things and make sure those are actually deleted to remain compliant. And so that's an important thing, but I think it's kind of like these are known technical
Right.
things, and you just need to be aware of the laws and regulations that you need to comply with so that you don't get caught off guard when someone says, can you do this request in a reasonable amount of time? Otherwise, you'll be fined GDPR's 4% of global revenue or something at the top of end of the fines.
Yeah, I can imagine this is going really bad. Because like how do you delete personal information that went out into one of those LLM providers? Well, you don't. Like what like I know that every large language model company claims they don't train their models on the data you send them, but yeah, there's a whole slew of ethical considerations around that. But in terms of agent fingerprinting, so there is nothing inherently personal or private that is getting analyzed to fingerprint an agent and figure out, is this an agent or a human? Because I
Yeah,
guess the problem would be if you're fingerprinting a human and you get their private plugins or whatever they have, is that considered a violation of their privacy? And this is the kind of, because from my perspective, no. But
for sure. Yeah, and in our perspective, we're really we're focusing on fraud prevention use cases, is what I'll say. And so there do exist things in sort of the more ad tech and marketing world where it's useful to know that this is a particular person. Whereas in the fraud prevention world, actually, a lot of what we do is targeted at scaled fraud. And
mm,
that's the kind of place where it doesn't really matter exactly who they are. It's that they look very suspicious. Maybe the people with this characteristic have been sending us a ton of traffic, or they've been creating lots of accounts, or they've been doing spam action. And so I think really focusing more on the activity end of that spectrum is more valuable, because at the end of the day, that is what you care about. And so fraud prevention is never going to be a money maker, right? It's kind of like impossible to say, oh, by reducing the amount of money that I lose, somehow this is going to make me more money. But it is an accelerant, and I think in many cases it prevents things that are potentially company ending, where if you are being constantly defrauded in a way that takes up your other resources, you just can't operate or build new features, build new value for your customers in a way that's effective.
right. So this is like an agentic captcha, basically, that actually works and does something more than just make people click on button. It actually identifies that this is a threat and gives you ways to circumvent it in different ways.
Yeah, exactly. And CAPTCHA is a great example here where I think there was a time when it was useful, and today anyone who is even slightly trying is easily able to evade CAPTCHAs, even using off-the-shelf tools. You can just say, ChatGPT, how many traffic lights are in this image? And you'll just go and check them off. That's something that is totally doable on the CAPTCHA side. So I think the CAPTCHA side, a lot of CAPTCHAs today, they're useful. They're stopping sort of like the bare minimum drive-by effort, but they're not really preventing people from doing like fraud if they want to. And we actually see that there exist like CAPTCHA solving services where you can go and for $5, someone will solve 1,000 CAPTCHAs for you. I think originally those were actually human operated. But today I'm pretty sure that these are just AI agents somewhere who are solving CAPTCHAs for their day job.
Yeah, I think so too. But I mean, sometimes human in the loop in some of these countries is cheaper than running agents, in all the
Yeah.
fairness. And anyways, to your point, most of it is transitioning into agentic anyways. So captchas have to account for agentic. Eventually, yeah, this whole tech. So where is this tech moving? Like, where do you see the fraud and the tech going like in the next 5 years? Because you are deploying the system in production. You're seeing the real threat, and where do you see this going? Because this is going to scale more. This is going this is going to increase. This is just the grassroots of what we are seeing right now.
Yeah, I think because fraud is like an adversarial space similar to cybersecurity, it's not like you can win. You're never going to go and solve things in the way that, say, I would say 10 years ago, certain kinds of like text recognition were not super great yet. Today, text recognition is almost entirely solved, right? I don't think we're ever going to get there for fraud prevention because, like you said, in many countries that have lower incomes, it is pretty profitable to go and scam people all day long. And so I think we're always going to be battling this. And so, sort of stepping back, I think the tools to understand this, there's always a process. You have your ways that you want to be making money, your resources that you want to protect. And it helps to understand from their perspective, if I were trying to steal money from you or profit from your service somehow, what would I do? And being able to understand where those attack vectors are and what they'll actually do once they get access, it goes a really long way. And that's where you put in your monitoring, your observability about what are these certain stats, what does quote unquote normal look like. I'm surprised that
Mm.
sometimes some businesses don't know what a normal week or a normal month looks like for them. And so we'll go and we'll say, hey, looks like you have 10 times the signups that you did last week. Is something going on? And sometimes they'll say, oh, thanks for letting us know. And sometimes it's a good thing. They launched a new product and they got a lot of traction. Sometimes it's something suspicious, like people are farming accounts to use later in some kind of attack.
Yeah, this makes sense. Especially in LLM service-based businesses, they're giving away free credits. There is a lot of value to be taken away from honest SaaS and LLM companies that are just doing that to promote their service. So, Bobbie, this was a very insightful conversation. Hopefully it provokes some thought in our listeners as well regarding cybersecurity and fraud prevention at the scale of Agentic and LLMs. Is there any other thoughts you'd like to leave our listeners with?
Yeah, I do think something that we see, I think, so in fraud prevention, people are very concerned that, say, ChatGPT agent is going to hack my site. But I'll say in practice, what we see is that someone uses ChatGPT agent once. And the thing that they use it for is to probe your site. And then they'll write a traditional automation script that uses something like Puppeteer or Selenium to attack your site. And I think this is actually a really good example of picking the right tools for the job, right? Once you've read a site once and analyzed it, you should be able to write a deterministic script that uses traditional technology, not LLM-based technology, to go and do a task. And so in fraud, attackers are very ROI motivated. And sometimes I think I'll talk to people who are especially working at startups, and I think, wow, using an LLM for this particular job could be overkill. I think a lot of the time there actually are simpler ways to get to the same result that are more reliable and cheaper. So I think that's an interesting one to keep in mind. As we're working on agents, they're very cool, they're very powerful, and sometimes they're more powerful than you need.
Yeah, I mean, people will use it for anything. You know, there is a library called Vibe Sort where you can use ChatGPT to sort an array for you, like a list. It will sort a list. It's called Vibe Sort. Imagine
That's
spending
great.
minutes on that.
Yeah.
But yeah. But to your point, that people will use it for anything these days because it's. But there is a cost associated with it. So why? So everybody, this is Bobbie Chen from Stytch. The checkout is Agent. I think it's a very powerful technology. And Bobbie, really happy to have you on the show. Hopefully I'll get to see you again, maybe at later days, see what you guys have built. Really excited about this tech. And thank you so much for being on the show.
Yeah, thanks for having me, Philippe.
Thank you, Bobbie.